Welcome to the DTE Energy Mackinac Live stage. We appreciate having you here as we kick off the Mackinac Policy Conference 2026. And so joining me today, I have two great friends. I have joining me David Eggert, reporter from Crane's Business, Detroit Business, and I also have Richard Czuba, president, CEO, all the things for the Glengariff Group. So, gentlemen, thanks for joining us. I'd like to send it over to you to talk about, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, thanks for joining us, Richard. We're going to talk about, you do polling for the Detroit Regional Chamber, and you've released a new poll this week to kind of coincide with this conference. And I wanted to start first with the big news from last week, Mayor Duggan dropping out of the governor's race. And I was wondering, one, if you were surprised, and two, what you kind of saw in polling that maybe led to this decision.
Well, you know, I think when we talk about the governor's race, we need to look at just how unusual what we were seeing was. Michigan had never seen an independent candidate with the caliber, with the name ID, with the financing that Mike Duggan had. So we didn't know how this was going to go. And I kept telling people, we don't know what's going to happen because we've never seen this before. So what we saw happen in the start of the year, he polled very well. He was coming off his mayorship. You know, pollsters like to say polls are a snapshot in time, and everybody laughs at us and ignores us. In this case, it was a snapshot in time. He was very popular. He had filled the void of the governor's race. Over the last 4 months, and particularly after the start of the Iran war, we saw voters turn very aggressively. This has become a referendum, not surprisingly, on President Trump. And so voters are making their decision in races based on their views of President Trump. Doesn't leave a lot of room for a center lane anymore.
How do you feel like the mayor's dropping out will affect the race going forward, both on the Republican and Democratic side?
Well, it certainly becomes exactly that referendum that we talked about. And I want to say it's not unusual that it's a referendum on the incumbent president. Midterms usually are. In this case, however, President Trump's numbers are not good. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat it. He's 37% approval in the state of Michigan, 57% disapprove. We've now got it at 48.5% of voters who strongly disapprove. So if that's what voters are making a decision on, you are seeing the shift, particularly with independents, to the Democratic side. They are the clear front runners. Something's got to change the conversation here for the Republicans to really not make it that referendum.
You know, Richard, one of the big events at the island this year is going to be the Democratic U.S. Senate debate. What are you seeing in the polling right now? Is anybody winning that race? Is it close?
Well, you know, 4 weeks ago, we had this race dead even between Haley Stevens, Mike Rogers, Mallory Morrow, Mike Rogers. We had Abdul El-Sayed down by 5 points in that race. I will say over the last 4 weeks, as gas prices have continued to surge, we are seeing particularly Haley Stevens moving ahead. And part of that is because we are 4 weeks from half of the Democrats having a ballot in their hands, and her campaign is the only campaign on television right now. She's the only one up on the air. Her numbers are shifting and moving right now as a result.
Richard, how much do you think Democratic primary voters, to what extent do they care about electability? You know, you've heard that argument, who's best to take on Republican Mike Rogers in November? And I was just curious, from polling and historical data, like, to what extent you think that'll be a factor when people go into the booth?
I think it is going to be a factor with what I'd call the establishment, the traditional Democrats. When we do polling in Democratic primaries, we ask the question, do you consider yourself a Democrat or a Democratic socialist? And right now we're looking at about 22% of that electorate that thinks they're Democratic socialists. Those are strongly with Abdul El-Sayed. That is the core of his support, his core backers. The rest of them are traditional Democrats, and they just want to win this seat. That's really important to them. So I do think it plays a factor, but you've got 22% of that vote that's very energized behind one candidate.
What about Republican Mike Rogers? What does he need to do to kind of break this 40-year, window where Republicans haven't been able to win a Senate race, and particularly as he runs in an environment that would suggest it could be a Democratic year?
Well, certainly the first issue he's got to deal with is the fact that he's running below a president that has 37% job approval. He's embraced that president quite aggressively. The last time when we elected a senator, it was Alyssa Slotkin. She actually created some distance, just enough distance to give herself some cushion to win that race narrowly against Mike Rogers. He's going to have to figure out how to give himself some cushion, even the smallest of cushion, if he hopes to lure those independents. We've seen this now during the Trump administration. Independents turn sharply against him in midterms, and Republicans pay the price of that because they have embraced him so aggressively.
Richard, I forgot to ask this about the governor's race. You did some polling that looked at Governor Whitmer's numbers. I'm wondering if you could walk us through those, and to what extent would it be a good or bad idea for candidates to run against Governor Whitmer's record?
Well, her job approval right now is 52% approved to 39% disapprove. And I got to tell you, her numbers are very unusual for Michigan because at the end of 8 years, governors usually aren't that popular anymore. People are ready for whoever's next. And yet here is Governor Whitmer, very popular, unusually strong numbers, and she's going to play a factor. We're not talking about this, but come October, if those numbers hold, she's going to be a factor in the races in Michigan because not only Democrats, but independents are going to look to her for direction. They trust her, they like her. Considering everything this administration has gone through, and I specifically refer to COVID, I don't think we had a governorship that ever had to deal with that. It's remarkable to see these numbers so strong.
Richard, just to shift gears a little bit, you've done some polling, and including this most recent round, looking at data centers. Can you walk us through what you found and what can, I guess, the business community take particularly on how to sell data centers to the public, which is pretty resistant right now?
Well, they are. First of all, we asked the question, would you be open to a data center within 25 miles of your own community, of your own home? And it was only 33% would be open to it. Overwhelming majority said they're not open to a data center. And yet, when we talk to them about potential protections, suddenly their mood shifts. They do shift towards being open to that. And I think the entire conversation on data centers has gotten backwards. And what I mean by that is everybody talks about the benefits of data centers. That's not what voters want to hear. Voters want to first and foremost know what protections are they going to get. And there are some key protections they want. One, that their electricity rates are not going up because of data centers. They want guarantees on this. In Michigan, incredibly important for a closed-loop water system. Michiganders know how to protect their water, they care about their water, and that's a key protection. And third, they don't want their tax money going to data centers. They think these companies are wealthy enough they can do it on their own. So, we're talking here about finding common ground at this conference. This is one of those areas to find common ground. Because if you oppose data centers, it's because you want those regulations. If you want to build data centers, you better put those regulations in place or you're not getting the data centers. So it behooves both sides to nail down these regulations. And then you can start having the conversation of what are the benefits? How does the community benefit? How does Michigan benefit? Until then, that conversation is closed.
Do you feel like there have been some strides made in that area that people are making the case more strongly, or not really?
Not yet. I think if that's something that our research can help with, it's this idea that shift the conversation. Let's nail down the regulations first. Give voters some assurances that they're not going to be left holding the bag on data centers, then move to getting them built. I mean, it's putting the cart before the horse here. And, you know, the problem is voters are seeing and hearing lots of examples from across the country where the regulations are not in place, perhaps. You know, we're seeing water taps going, you know, not running, or water coming out brown. Well, voters don't want to deal with that here. And so they're not going to go along with it until they know there's some guarantees. Closed loop water system is a simple way to deal with that issue. But it's the electric rates issue that really does concern voters. When we have done focus groups on this topic with voters, they're very clear they don't want their rates to surge. Demand is going to surge, but they don't want their rates to surge as a result of this. And once you get past these regulations, you can then have these conversations of jobs, the benefits it brings to the communities, the fact that it's crucial to the infrastructure of the state of Michigan. One of the questions we did ask was, how important is it to have data centers to make sure Michigan remains the center of the automobile industry? On that question, a majority of voters do believe that we need data centers to retain the auto industry. It's a very Michigan-specific issue.
You found some, you also looked, I think, at just, do people think their own use of data contributes to the need for data centers? What did you find there?
Well, we did. We asked them how much did their own use of computers or cell phones lead to the need for data centers? And what we found was 59% of voters say their own use has no impact on the need for data centers. And I laugh because one of the most interesting numbers was the highest number was amongst those under the age of 30 who are most using data. They don't equate their use of equipment, their use of computers, cell phones, with having anything to do with data centers. And I think it behooves everyone to have a more honest conversation about, this is why we need data centers, you're the reason we need data centers.
I was going to follow up on that. I mean, does it need to be that explicit? I mean, do you feel like that case needs to be made to kind of turn around the attitude towards data centers, that this is something you need or you use?
Well, I think it's part of the conversation. But honestly, the lead of this conversation has got to be those protections. Voters just aren't even going to listen to this simple idea of, you're the reason we need data centers, unless they know they're not going to pay the price of those data centers in terms of cost, in terms of water usage. Until we deal with that issue, there's not a lot of moving forward. So it behooves both sides to sit down, nail down what these regulations are going to be, what these guardrails are going to be. That plays to everyone's benefit in this conversation.
Okay. Final question. What's voters' mood on the economy as they head into these midterm elections, which is obviously often a key harbinger of like where things may head?
Well, I think their mood to the economy is reflected in the president's poll numbers at 37, and we see huge red flags. We now see 49% of voters expect inflation to go up in the next year. 60% of voters see the economy as weakening as compared to strengthening. These are all very big red flags, and probably one of the biggest red flags, the highest number we've seen since we started asking this question about 4 years ago. Are good-paying jobs available to anybody that wants them? Only 46% of voters now say that. That's the lowest number we've seen. It's the lowest number we've seen during the Biden years or the Trump years. Those are huge red flags. Voters are very concerned about the direction of the economy, and it's driven by gas prices and groceries.
Thank you, Richard Czuba, for your insights on where Michigan's electorate is at.
Welcome.